when people ask me, like, how do you feel your impact has changed? And usually I respond with a question. I'll say, how many patients did you have last shift? And say it's like 4 patients or 6 patients, depending on your specialty, right? So that's 6 patients that you impacted your last shift. But depending on what role you go into, so if you go into an EHR type role where you manage the EHR system for the hospital, how many patients are being cared for under that software that you manage? Or how many patients are being touched by the product that you now work on? Like those lives are so many, or the number is outsized compared to what you can do physically yourself on a shift on the floor. So that connection, it may not be direct. You may not be holding their hand or like talking to them directly, but there's still a huge amount of impact you can make, even though you're not directly at the bedside standing next to that patient.
Welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside. I'm Audrey, your host, and a nurse who pivoted my path several years ago. After 8 years as a critical care nurse, I was ready for change. I craved higher pay and more flexibility, but was struggling to find a clear path forward. Fast forward through positions in recruiting, customer success, and marketing, and many lessons learned along the way. Today, I run Pivot Path, a company dedicated to empowering nurses to redefine their careers. This podcast is designed to help you navigate the journey from clinical bedside nursing to a fulfilling career that aligns with your passions and goals. Here, you'll discover inspiring stories from nurses who've gone beyond the bedside, successfully transitioning to non-clinical roles, or redefining their nursing career. Join us as we hear their stories and share actionable strategies to help you make your own leap. Whether you're a new listener curious about what lies beyond the bedside, or a returning audience member in need of some fresh motivation, this podcast is your go-to resource for exploring new opportunities that can transform your career. Let's get started. Today, we're excited to welcome Kevin Uranyi, a former firefighter and EMT, 911 dispatcher, and a nurse who's now making waves as a product manager at Trusted Health. Kevin's background gives him a unique perspective on nursing and healthcare, particularly in travel nursing and career flexibility. Today, he'll share his career journey that led him to his current role as product manager, talk about the flexibility of nursing experience, and discuss Clini-Vibes, a platform that's helping travel nurses make informed decisions about the facilities that they work in. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Audrey, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kevin and I, we worked together at Trusted Health, kind of though. Kevin, I always felt like I was like following in your footsteps a little bit. I came after you, came to the clinical success team after you switched over to the works side of the business to pursue the product path. But like I said, you kind of paved the road for me and kind of showed me what was possible for like nurses within a health tech company. So I think it's really interesting that you ended up in product, which I feel like many nurses feel like is a far stretch. So did you always have your eyes set on being involved with product, or how did that come to be?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. It's a question I asked myself a lot too, because I think when I started this journey, I didn't know that product was where I wanted to go. It's kind of the road that laid itself out in front of me. And well, I'm sure we'll get into like how we got here, but I was on my last travel assignment. I just started telling myself, like, I'm going to work for a tech startup. I'm going to work for a tech startup. And working with you as a CSP was that doorway. So walk through that doorway and then just being in the throes of a tech company and getting to interact with different facets of the business. The more I interact with the product, I was like, wow, product is really cool. And that's where you can have a really outsized impact on the work you do on a particular part of the business. I was like, that seems awesome. So I just kept making strides to try and get into that position and place myself in an area of opportunity where if the opportunity were to present itself, I could seize it. And that's kind of how the cards laid out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned that you were travel nursing. Let's rewind just a little bit. So your nursing career, how long were you working at the bedside, and what was it that first made you had that first thought that you just described as a travel nurse of potentially wanting to leave the bedside and work in health tech?
Totally. So I got my nursing degree in 2019, I think. So I was a staff nurse for a year and then started traveling right at the beginning of 2020, pre-COVID, and worked through COVID. Obviously, that turned into a thing. It wasn't a thing when we started travel nursing. We thought it was going to be fun. And we were in Washington State in Tacoma when King County had the first recorded COVID case. So we were like, wow, this may change our plans for the year or so. And it turned into going to New York City and then out to Las Vegas and whatnot. So I'm sure we'll touch on nurse burnout a little bit, but a little bit of nurse burnout, wanting to change the impact and how I have that impact on patients for more broadly. And a little bit of reversion to the mean, I would say. I think I've always been a little bit of like a nerd to say. So throughout COVID, I got like a Nintendo Switch, and that was like my first video game console in a really long time because I did so focused on nurse schooling and everything. So kind of going back to my hobbies pre-nursing school, I was like, maybe I want to get more involved in technology again because I really enjoy this kind of stuff. So that's when I started just talking about to myself and my significant other who I was traveling with, saying, hey, maybe we should explore other opportunities like this technology space. It's growing. There's a lot of opportunity, especially for nurses. A lot of companies need nurses to build their product, to grow their business, to consult on different ideas, things like that. And that's where we started leveraging our experience to move into a position like that.
So I think that it's really impressive that you had that foresight of, companies who are building solutions in the healthcare environment need nurse input. Because I could not agree with you more. I think that whenever someone can pull in a nurse to, talk to them about a product that they're building or a new EHR system or really whatever it is that's going to, the intention is to insert it into the healthcare ecosystem. I think that having that nurse perspective is so crucial. But I mean, I would say that you are kind of like ahead of the curve on that one because I think that some companies realize that. And I think that some companies, like I am seeing it more and more. I think that companies are coming around to realizing the true value that a nurse and their perspective can bring to their product. So, I mean, I'm just really impressed that that's something that you were thinking of at the time.
Yeah, I think you see nurses start thinking that way too, right? So there was kind of this mass exodus away from the bedside during COVID. And a lot of nurses were saying, hey, I have these skills that are transferable elsewhere. It doesn't need to be at the bedside. And I think you'll probably see an uptick in some of the statistics as the years go by, as far as nurses moving into like hospital administrator roles, just saying, hey, I have a lot of really good ideas as far as how this hospital is run. Rather than continue to try and change it at the bedside, I'm going to try and change it from a level above, and you're going to see that transition. And I think it's a similar transition, be it in a hospital or a company tangential to a hospital, climbing that type of corporate ladder, so to say, to try and have impacts below.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned transferable skills that you developed at the bedside. This is something that I love talking about. And I coach nurses on it through Pivot Path because I think that sometimes if you have only worked in a clinical setting, it's kind of hard to contextualize those skills outside of that setting and how they might apply. What do you think are some of the skills that you realized through your career pivot that you had developed at the bedside that were serving you really well in this non-clinical position?
All the soft skills you develop at the bedside transfer elsewhere. So your ability to communicate, your ability to empathize is huge. To convey complex ideas simply. So obviously you have a ton of education as a nurse. You have all these scientific concepts in your head. But when you have the 6-year-old in front of you, you need to explain what's going on. You can't explain him your anatomy physiology class that you took for 6 months, right? You need to explain on simpler terms, and just being able to distill complex scenarios and thought to simple solution, easy to communicate, be punctual in your communication, be punctual, period. All of those things that you practice on a daily shift are immediately reflected on almost any other type of corporate environment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that, when I left the bedside, I was thinking, how is my Bachelor of Science in Nursing and my very clinical nursing experience going to serve me outside of nursing? And so I just had so many aha moments when I started realizing, oh, like the way that I'm doing this, the way that I'm communicating this, or my ability to prioritize or work under pressure or in a fast paced environment, all of these things are things that I learned how to do from working as a nurse and to see those translate so well into really all kinds of things. I mean, those are essential in all types of roles, not just like one path. So I think that it's really cool for nurses to start realizing, like, okay, like these skills that I have here, like these are a little bit of a superpower that I can take with me into all kinds of things.
100% all of those, and the ability to adapt and to adapt those skills that you built. Most of my nursing background was ED and PICU, so acute care. And as I grew up, as I already mentioned, I was a firefighter EMT for a while, so a lot of pre-hospital ED experience, and use a very different type of communication style in those environments. And moving to a corporate type environment, communicating as if you were in the emergency department doesn't always make everyone feel like super warm and fuzzy. So learning how to adapt to those communication styles is something that you learn in dealing with patients, because you got to talk to different patients differently, and you tweak day by day the way you do things in order to be the most effective in your position. And that's something you learn at the bedside and something you can continue to grow upon when you leave the bedside.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you made your pivot, we talked about how you did the clinical success team first. You and I both worked that role. And, for me, that was really fulfilling because I really loved my travel nursing career. And so getting to have a hand in that experience for other travel nurses, I really enjoyed. But talk to me about like kind of what your experience was in that position and how it kind of led you to the next.
So working as a CSP, and we keep saying the abbreviation CSP was clinical success partner. I don't know if we said that or not yet, but the role was really to help nurses as they're on assignment and as they go into an extension. And having traveled through COVID, I felt like I had a lot of really valuable experience that translated to what nurses were going through. So I had been in New York City in April of 2020 when it was horrible. And then I was in Las Vegas when it was still really bad out there. And so when nurses were concerned about their working environment, I felt like I could empathize with them again. So go back to one of those soft skills, empathy. I was able to really listen to what they were saying and know what they were going through and talk to them and help them get to whatever solution was best for them. And it was fulfilling being able to help other coworkers or colleagues, however we want to see them. They weren't working directly with them. We were a part of their journey and whatever part of their assignment they were at. So being able to help other coworkers and other nurses through a time that was really difficult to be a travel nurse. I mean, let's be honest, you were in the middle of a global pandemic. You were working in maybe a place you've never seen before with strange people, horrible patient outcomes. Like it was a really difficult time to be a travel nurse. Being able to extend some of that empathy and care and share those experiences and almost suffer together sometimes was rewarding for me personally, as part of that community in nursing is lacking from time to time. You still have that eat your young mentality, I would say. Being able to break down that wall a little bit and be a little bit more supportive was very fulfilling.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And, a lot of nurses, I think, worry about losing a sense of fulfillment when they leave a clinical, like bedside nursing role, because we're so used to that direct hands on, like I directly touched this patient's life today. And so I think that recognizing that you can still make an impact and you can still feel fulfilled through your work, through these other types of roles, I think is just an important acknowledgement.
That's a really great point. And that's actually something that I mention when people ask me, like, how do you feel your impact has changed? And usually I respond with the question, I'll say, how many patients did you have last shift? And say it's like 4 patients or 6 patients, depending on your specialty, right? So that's 6 patients that you impacted your last shift. But depending on what role you go into, so if you go into an EHR type role where you manage the EHR system for the hospital, how many patients are being cared for under that software that you manage? Or how many patients are being touched by the product that you now work on? Like those lives are so many, or the number is outsized compared to what you can do physically yourself on a shift on the floor. So that connection, it may not be direct, you may not be holding their hand or like talking to them directly, but there's still a huge amount of impact you can make, even though you're not directly at the bedside standing next to that patient.
Yes, I completely agree. And that impact can look so different too. Like, if you use the example of like a EHR, like for you and I working at Trusted, it was like nurses that we were impacting, and like those nurses were taking care of so many patients every day. So the impact does look different, but it's certainly there. And that impact can, what I love about this podcast is just sharing all of the different paths that nurses have taken and like how different that impact can look. It's kind of, just pick your passion and follow it. And so tell me about how you made that switch from being a CSP to getting more involved with product work.
So it came to Trusted, just knowing about Trusted and the travel nurse side of things. As a travel nurse, I was obviously very familiar with Trusted, one of the best travel agencies out there as far as like finding pay packages and whatnot. And after I got inside of Trusted, I learned about this other entity that existed inside the company called Works. And this was like their secret software project that they're working on at the time. Not a lot of people, really small, scrappy team. And started talking to some of the people on that team. And I was like, hey, that sounds like it may be a really exciting thing to do. And when I think it was like mid COVID or so, I decided I was going to go back to school and go back for my business degree. And so during COVID, I'm traveling, getting my business degree. And when I'm finishing up my degree, I'm now kind of focused as far as where I want to go. I know that I want to transition more into a commercial software based, commercial software based company away from a travel nurse based company. So now that we have this other offshoot of Trusted called Works, I'm trying to look at how I can move over there. And an opportunity arose where I was able to make the transition. So I flipped over there as a business operations associate. And that is where I really got in on the ground floor at a really small team making really cool software that was poised to launch to a new client. And that's really where the floodgates of like learning and opportunity opened up.
How what do you think was the hardest thing for you to learn as you stepped into that new world?
With your nursing education, as my background, obviously, that was like the foundation of providing care, right? And all the soft skills that we mentioned are transferable, but there was a lot of business knowledge that was lacking. Now, school helped with some of that as I was going back and finishing my degree, but obviously, even just like nursing school, school is very different than when you get onto the floor for the first time and you have like your first code, right? So trying to put all that into practice for the first time, just like when graduating nursing school, was a challenge. And being able to navigate that and grow and develop, again, similarly to the first time or first 6 months, first year as a nurse, I'd venture to say that nurses are never really done learning. But maybe the difficulty of learning goes down after you get over some of the core big blocks. Putting those business muscles to work and starting to flex them on a more regular basis, not in an academic environment, would be the biggest hurdle I faced initially.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's just a different world, and I do think that another soft skill that nurses bring to the table is I think that we tend to be very adaptable and resourceful, and we can learn pretty quickly. And so I think that, stepping into that new environment, just like if you are a travel nurse and show up at a brand new facility or you get floated to a completely different unit, like we figure it out. And I think that we are very used to learning by doing and just kind of learning as we go. And I think that those skills serve us really well. And when we are in completely new environments and roles, like, you just described.
100%. And know all my ED nurses will feel the same way. So shout out.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so did you have any previous technical knowledge that served you in like the product aspect of things, or are those other things that you just kind of learned as you went?
Aside from just a core interest in computers, like I've always kind of been a computer geek. I really like playing with different things. No, those were all things that I just kind of developed as I went. And when I started in the CSP role, I really dove into reporting and making custom reports and learning how to extrapolate data, pull meaningful assumptions or conclusions from that data, and turn that into an actionable event. And I leaned into that as a CSP role, and that was hugely transferable once I got onto the work side of things and the more business focused side of things. And I expanded upon that. Like I learned SQL so we can learn how to query databases and pull reports on my own. You don't need like a middle layer to pull the report for you. And just continuing to develop those skills is something that I didn't have initially, but like you hinted on, nurses incredibly adaptable. They love learning, they should love learning. I leaned into that and just started learning different things.
Yeah. And so tell me, because I think that this is something that when I was working bedside, if you had told me you were a product manager, I would have no idea what that actually means. How would you describe your job and what you actually do every day?
That's a really good question. I think depending on the day, my answer changes. I think I'd say if you took like an octopus with its 8 different tentacles, right? And you put a different part of the business in each of the octopuses or octopusi, whatever the plural form of octopus may be, each one of its tentacles. So you have, say, like reporting in one and a customer in another one. Like we're kind of like an orchestrator of the product being the solution, the software, whatever your company is offering for a service. And being able to take the needs of the customer, being able to repeat them internally, figure out what the priority needs are, and how to prioritize, implement, execute, and then deliver those end results for the business would be what a product manager does.
That's a good description. You guys are orchestrators, and octopus is a great analogy. Okay, so I want to go back a little bit to the transition from being a clinical nurse to entering into the health tech world. For me, I had a lot of concern about switching from my 3-day work week to a 5-day work week. But I found out that the work-life balance trade-offs are like so huge that that argument was like completely out the window for me. So, what was your experience for that transition as far as work-life balance is concerned?
There's pros and cons to everything. I worked for a lot of years. And like you mentioned, I was a firefighter where I did 24 48s. And then before that, then I one dispatcher where I also did 12s, but it wasn't 3 12s. It was like I wound up working 50 days out of the month. But there are days when I missed the shift work because that working 3 days and then having 4 off is awesome. But then there are other days where I enjoyed not having to get up at say 5 o'clock for your 7 o'clock shift, depending on your commute, and then you're not getting back into bed until 9 p.m. So your 12-hour day turns into a 14, 15, 16-hour day. If you get out on time,
Mhm.
right? There's pros and cons. Kind of like my what is a product manager answer. I think my answer to this changes based on the day. There are days I really wish I only worked 3 days a week. And then there are days I enjoy being able to structure my day Monday through Friday and know that when I'm working, I'm getting meaningful work done in a short, condensed amount of time versus spread out over longer. Especially maybe on the night shift, you're not working your entire time, right? You're going to have downtime on your shift. I know some nurses out there are going to crucify me for saying that, but sometimes you have some shifts that are busier than others. You're not so busy shifts. You can't really do anything. You're more reactive as a nurse in that standpoint. Whereas if you're driving like a Monday through Friday type transition, you can really pinpoint your work to be productive during those hours. And it's more condensed and you get a little bit more time to yourself on a daily basis.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I would have, if you had asked me like a handful of years ago, I would have died on the hill that a 3-day work week is better than 5. But now that I've realized that, with the 5-day work week, I'm making dinner with my husband. Like I have my evenings to like do things for myself or my family, which, makes a huge difference. And then you add in the flexibility of remote work too, and just, being at home and I can do my laundry during the day, or, I've worked with a lot of moms who can take kids to or from school. So it is different, but yeah, it's all about trade-offs, but I'm personally now, I think, leaning towards being a 5-day work week fan.
Yeah, I will say I feel better now. So if that accounts for anything, maybe I probably do lean that way also. But
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so we touched on this a little bit earlier, and the your "feel better" statement is making me think of this, but let's talk some about nurse burnout because we know that this is a major problem more so than ever. I think that you and I have probably both experienced it, as have I don't know, like, maybe I wouldn't be that far off saying all nurses have experienced it to some extent. What was your experience with nurse burnout?
yeah, I think I would support your statement with all nurses. And I would like to talk to the nurses and like, no, I'm not burnt out. I'm feeling great. because you're going to get there at some point, right? It doesn't really matter what you're doing. I think it's more spoken about in the nursing realm because it's so high stress, and the healthcare situation in the country more broadly is just really on a focus. So it gets a lot of attention. But my personal experience with it, I would say that when we started traveling, like I said, it was early 2020, pre-COVID. It was just going to be a lot of fun. And then we started just traveling during COVID and being exposed to the conditions that were so prevalent during COVID for your shifts, however many shifts you were working. There were some doing 312s, there were some doing 60-hour weeks. I'm sure you saw some of those crazy pay contracts. Like being exposed in that type of environment for so long, it turns into a chronic stress type situation, right? Where no longer are you in the short acute phase. It's chronic stress that you're putting your body through. And it's not just physical, it's emotional stress that you're feeling. And to say that you're not feeling that, you're kind of, I mean, you're dismissing what your body is telling you. So by the end of 2020, when I was on my, what wound up being my last travel assignment, I didn't know I was going to at the time. I was really starting to be in the throes of this is hard. This has been hard for a while. And my travel partner, she's my fiance now, we talked about maybe we should just take a break and then go get another travel assignment. Cause I always said I want to go to Alaska in the winter because that's where everyone wants to go when they live in the Southeast, you're used to the heat. Let's go find as cold as we can get. Um, she was not as thrilled about that idea, but towards the end of that assignment, I was acknowledging the signs that, hey, maybe I am burnt out a little bit. Maybe I should just relax and come back to it after some time. This pandemic has been crazy. Let's spend some time with our families and hug them, tell them we love them, and that we maybe just want to spend some time at home because they were worried about us. We were worried about them. So that's kind of where I think I started to see the signs of it. And then my story obviously pivoted from there. I wouldn't say I left because of the burnout, but knowing that some of those feelings were in the back of my head, I'm sure contributed to some of the decisions I made.
Yeah. I think that that chronic stress can be sometimes harder to recognize than the acute phase of stress. What signs did you personally like recognize in yourself that made you think like, like maybe this is burnout?
I don't know if I could put my finger on anything particular where I was like, this is definitely burnout. I think just the day to day, your body like knows when something's wrong. Even if you don't know when something's wrong, like your body knows. And that's very much the healthcare field in general. I think we're always just kind of looking for those signs. I don't know if I could put my finger on any one thing and say, I think this is when I knew. I think it was just the totality of the circumstances arising, or maybe I didn't sleep so great this night, but then I slept fine the next night, or I couldn't get to sleep and I just wasn't feeling as though I had as much energy, maybe. Like, I don't know. That's a good question. I'd probably have to simmer on that one a little bit to see if I could put my finger on anything. But I think I was just acknowledging maybe some more untold thoughts I had at the time.
Yeah. It's a hard question, one that I've like thought about some because I think if you asked me if I was burnt out when I was still working at the bedside, I probably you would not have gotten like a resounding yes from me. Like I don't think that I realized it as much in the moment as I do looking back on myself at the time. And for me, like I can just, I can see the compassion fatigue. It was just more of like, I just didn't have anything left to give to be like super compassionate anymore, which is like not the nurse that I set out to be. So, yeah, I think it takes a toll in lots of different ways. So, I think it's, just something worth talking about because it feels different for different people. And I think that, in my own experience, you don't always realize it at the time. But yeah, I know that it's a prevalent problem because I think that we both kind of agree on nursing being awesome in the sense that it's a career that can serve as a foundation for a lot. And I like connecting this to the burnout conversation because I think a lot of nurses are feeling kind of stuck in their career right now and not necessarily seeing like all of the applications of the experience that they do have. And I know that, we both travel nursed. And so, I we both agree like nursing is great. You can travel nurse, you can, go work in health tech, you can do all of these things. We've talked some about the transferable skills, but how do you feel like that flexibility will like continue to serve you in your career? I know that we've talked about like how you've kind of pivoted into this health tech world, but how do you think like in your day-to-day now and like moving forward, how does your nursing foundation and your career like continue to serve you?
I'd say everything we spoke about already, as far as like your soft skills, your ability to adapt, your empathy, like that that becomes your foundation after so long, right? And you learn it in nursing school and you build upon it when you're at the bedside. Even once you step away from the bedside, those skills and that foundation doesn't disappear. It's like when you build a skyscraper, you keep building floors on top of it, but once you're on like the 50th floor, you still have the basement. And if that basement is the nursing education that you took and those patient experiences that kind of change the way you interact with people, that's still there. And you're always able to call upon those skills and those experiences and use them again, but you're able to build upon them. So if your 49th floor didn't look so good, you don't like the paint on the walls or anything, you can build the 50th floor, paint it the right color, and you just change the one little thing, but you now have two subsets of traits that you can pull to your tool belt and use wherever you're applying them.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I you have lots of good analogies, Kevin, this conversation. I love it. You paint a good visual picture for me.
I feel like that's probably the only way I can communicate is with analogies.
Well, okay, so let's chat some about Clini-Vibes. You've been a traveler, I've been a traveler. We've worked at Trusted, who caters to travel nurses and that lifestyle. What is Clini-Vibes and how does it help travelers?
Yeah, so Clini-Vibes, if we go back to like what being a product manager is and why I enjoy it, it's because I get to create things, right? In some fundamental way, I have an impactful outcome or an impactful decision or say in the final outcome of the product. And being able to make things is something that I've always just enjoyed. So while I was traveling, it was really hard to get information about different facilities. And obviously, because times were so dynamic during COVID, things were changing so rapidly. You had no idea if the hospital you were going to is going to be the same as that Facebook review you saw from 18 months ago. It may be very different now. And it was hard for us to get up to date information, the hospitals we were dealing with. So I created this platform where travel nurses could submit their reviews on the hospital that they were just at, and nurses could sign in. They could search for their facility and see what nurses had to say. And that was a way that I got to do something I enjoyed, which was create something and build something from the ground up and something new and help fellow nurses that were traveling and use it as a resource myself. When I was trying to find a new travel assignment, I would be like, hey, let's go see if there's a review for that hospital. And if it was horrible, I'd be like, hey, maybe we shouldn't go to this one. Or if it was good, it'd say, hey, this was posted a month ago. Maybe this hospital isn't so bad. Let's go here.
Yeah. And you're right. That is hard to really just keep a pulse on as like what the experience is at any given facility and on any unit as a traveler. It's kind of you're walking into the unknown on that first day of your assignment. So having that resource, I think is really cool. I would have loved knowing about that when I was a travel nurse because I walked in blind to every assignment and hope for the best. But yeah, I think that that's great because even sites like if I'm thinking about like Glassdoor or something like that, where people can go and review companies, like I've looked there, but if you think about the places that nurses work, there's often other jobs and other types of employees besides nurses. And that experience in whatever other type of role is going to be very different than the experience of a nurse on any given unit. So I think it's really cool to have a platform specifically for nurses to do that.
Yeah. And even if it was a nurse on, say, Glassdoor site that you found, the lens of a travel nurse sometimes is very different. So being able to get that feedback from a travel nurse and what their travel experience was like sometimes was a differentiating factor in choosing a hospital or not choosing a hospital.
Yeah, absolutely. I I love that you mentioned your passion of just like being able to create in some way, getting to do that, whether it's your hobbies, your work, whatever it is. I think that that's a very cool thing. And you have a hobby that, in my mind, seems like creation. So you have a passion for cars. Talk to us about how your creativity kind of comes to life in your hobby.
Yeah, so I kind of grew up around cars. My father was always building muscle cars. He always had like hot rods growing up. I go to car shows when I was just like a little kid. I remember grabbing the trophy and be like, "Oh, we want a trophy." So I'd always been around them. And when I got my license and I got my first car, I was like, "This is the best thing ever. This is amazing. I have a car. I can do whatever I want to it." To the typical like 17-year-old boy in high school thing, right? So I now have a 1963 Volkswagen Beetle that we are converting to electric. And we drove our first electric car on our last travel assignment during COVID. And as someone that's always been into cars, I drove this and I was like, this is insane. This is crazy. Like it's very fast. The power is wild. I was like, we got to do more of this. And we had this 1963 Volkswagen Beetle for, I mean, at this point, 10 years. So we've had it and it started running not so great. And we tried fixing it and we screwed something out. So we're going to have to fix something else. I was like, all right, here's what we're going to do. Rather than just put it back to what it was, we're going to make it totally different. So that's kind of what started this whole adventure. And I'm going to call it an adventure because it's been nothing short of it. Converting this 1963 Beetle to an electric motor. And we're almost at the finish line. I was actually up at 5 o'clock this morning working on it. And I'm getting married in October. So like a month and a half. And it's supposed to be at the wedding. So hopefully I finish in time. If not, my fiance may not meet me at the altar. We'll see.
That's awesome. I was about to ask you when what the timeline was on this project. So you've got a firm deadline there.
Um, yes.
Well, that's really cool. I think that, it's through, your career and even just like that hobby, that like passion of yours. I think that it's awesome how you just, I mean, continuously learn. I am sure that there is no like set instruction manual on how to turn a 1963 Beetle to an electric vehicle.
To say the least, no, there is not.
Oh man. Well, that's really cool. Kevin, so we've talked about a lot of really good stuff here, but if you could provide a couple of takeaways for the audience listening, knowing that there are probably some nurses listening who are feeling a little bit stuck, very interested in what paths might be out there, maybe dealing with some burnout, whether they recognize it yet or not. What advice or tips would you give to nurses in that position about navigating a career transition or just carving a unique path for themselves?
I think that the first thing I would say is that your skills are valuable and probably more valuable than you give them credit for. You spend a lot of time and effort reading books, taking notes, going to clinical, and eventually providing care. That is not wasted in any shape or form of the word. That is incredibly valuable. And like I mentioned, serves as the foundation for your professional toolbox at a core fundamental level. So if I were looking at making the transition again, I would not discount the skills that I already have because I know I did initially. I was like, I don't really have that much to bring to the table. I'm a nurse. I've been travel nursing for a year. Maybe I can find another job doing something. So I would pay myself the credit where credit is due, and it's due because of all of that time you spent developing those core fundamental skills. The second thing I would say is just to be open with what's out there. And I know that sounds really cliche because it is just cliche, but there's a lot of opportunity in areas where you may not think about it or your brain may not initially go to. And if you're looking at making a pivot like that, you should be open to doing something that maybe you wouldn't initially have thrown the dart at the board for, or an idea or a business that maybe I didn't really hear about them before, but this seems interesting. Let's go see what they're about. At least have the conversation about it, have the phone call. Because if you had told me that I'd be doing what I am now, I'd be like, I don't know if that's something I want to do. But once you start getting in the throes of interacting in that type of environment and working on things like that, you start learning how cool it is to do some of these things. And you may find something that you didn't know you'd be interested in. So don't discount what you've already done for yourself as a nurse, and then be open to what is out there because there's a lot of opportunity out there, especially as someone with a strong fundamental skill set like a nurse. So see where some of your inner curiosity can take you.
If you'd like to get in touch with Kevin after today's show, you can find him on Instagram, Threads, and X at Kevin Uranyi, or reach out to him by email at kevin@kevinuranyi.com. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. And if you were inspired by today's conversation, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who'd love it just as much as you did. If you're ready to pivot your path, visit the job board at jobs.mypivotpath.com. And if you have any questions or just want to say hi, feel free to email me at audrey@mypivotpath.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.